Hi, everyone. We're so happy to have you with us today. I'm Scott Kelly, the Talk They Hear You Partner Outreach Lead. Now, we have a great session today for you on campaign evaluation. Now, before we get started, I want to note that we'll be recording this meeting and sending follow-up information via e-blast within a few business days. If you have any questions at any time, please add them to the Q&A box located at the bottom of your screen or type them in the chat. Now, I'll pass it over to Rob Vincent to kick things off.
Hey, thanks, Scott. Hey, welcome, everybody. Thank you for really joining us today for the Talk to Hear You Community Engagement Meeting. My name is Rob Vincent. I'm the Associate Administrator for Alcohol Prevention and Treatment Policy here at SAMHSA. And I happen to have the pleasure of leading the work on the campaign. Today, we're here to talk to you about evaluation and logic models and really engage you in that space. You know, evaluating your programs goes far beyond just creating a logic model or a comprehensive plan of some type. Our goal really is to help you continue with webinars like these to review all aspects of evaluation and help you develop some better insights and tools that will help you better evaluate your program. You know, evaluations really should not only just assess the ability of the organization to implement the campaign, but really should help you really achieve your overall goals. And so we really do want to hear you and engage you today in that process. And so please, we welcome all of your questions. By using the Talk to Hear You campaign, we hope that you can reach your campaign goals by creating opportunities for you to share the messaging and materials and the various products that we've created to help parents, caregivers, schools, and community members alike really get informed, be prepared, and start to have these conversations with youth around the dangers and risks of substance abuse. I look forward to connecting with each of you and working together to see how you implement the campaign and your evaluation efforts. And with that, I'd like to introduce Dr. Melissa Selden, who is our lead evaluator, and we'll proceed from there. Melissa?
Thanks, Rob. Welcome, everybody. We so appreciate you joining us here for this partner feedback session on evaluation. We really want to hear about how you evaluate, fund, and report out on the Talk They Hear You campaign in your community. It's important that we have opportunities like this to hear directly from our partners in the field who are doing this work every day, hearing what's working, what can be improved, and what else you might need in order to make your community partner organization a success. You are directly responsible for the overall success of Talk They Hear You and its reputation as a trusted, credible campaign and brand. Your input is what truly makes this campaign work and why your participation today is so important. We would also love to see you on camera if you feel comfortable. I'd like to now introduce Rachel and Aaron. They will be helping to present the information today, and Rachel's going to start by going over our agenda.
Thanks so much, Melissa, and welcome everyone. Since Talk to Hear You is created for you, our goal today is to capture all of your feedback. This will help us make sure you have the support you need to evaluate the campaign in your community. As you can see from the agenda on the screen, we're going to start our session with some discussion around reporting requirements. So to get started, we're going to kick things off with our first poll of the day, which is 3 questions. Dave's going to put those up on the screen for us. Thank you. And let's take 1 to 2 minutes to answer those questions. So the first one, do you collect any data or metrics related to the campaign? Yes or no. If you've done in the past, we would like to hear that as well. Or if you have any plans to in the future, that would be great. If you do collect metrics, what do you do with that data? Do you share it with anyone in your community? Do you go back and inform funders of any of that information? Feel free to let us know on question number 2. And lastly, we want to know who funds the implementation of Talk They Hear You within your community. Do you apply for federal, state, or local grants? Do you have donors or volunteers who help support within your community? Or if you have some other type of funding that's not listed, feel free to drop that in the chat as well.
So it seems that most of you do collect data and metrics related to the campaign, and you use that for your own internal evaluations, sharing with funders, sharing with community members, and you're also funded with a combination of federal and state and local grants. You also have volunteer support. So thank you so much. we'd like to run through at this point an overview of the evaluation components and methods that you may have already implemented or might be interested in. We'd also like to bust a few myths that you may be thinking about when you hear the word evaluation. So for us, evaluation is a catch-all way to show your progress and address the needs of your community through data collection and analysis. The information you're collecting can show you where you might need to improve or target for future efforts. Evaluating your progress also allows you to set and achieve goals. So it's not something that is necessarily time-consuming, expensive, or complicated. You've likely completed some steps of an evaluation without thinking about it. An evaluation should also be a continuous process, a normal part of campaign implementation, rather than something you do periodically or only once. Conducting a continuous evaluation allows you and your organization to see progress over a long period of time and frequently assess areas of need and allow you to celebrate your successes. Small-scale evaluations completed with just a few members of your community organization can still provide valuable information and are just as important as a large-scale evaluation. Now, Erin will dive a little more into what makes up an evaluation.
Thank you, Melissa. Hello, everyone. The steps we're going to walk through are part of the CDC's framework for program evaluation in public health. The first step in any evaluation is to identify and engage your stakeholders. Who would be interested in your results? This could include funders, policymakers, parents and caregivers, and educators and school officials. Including stakeholders' input in your evaluation can ensure that your evaluation questions align with stakeholder interests. Next, you're going to want to describe the program. What Talk They Hear You campaign products have you chosen to use? Who in your community is being exposed to these products? How do you typically connect with your community members? What other materials or information are you using within your community? Questions should be appropriate based on the subject matter and be sure to relate to prevention efforts. One way to organize your questions is by using a logic model. A little later on today, we're going to review the steps and provide you an example of a logic model. Once you have your questions and materials of interest selected, you will need to design your evaluation. Think about questions you want to address based on the feedback that you've been given by your stakeholders. Make a plan for how you will collect that information and how useful that data will be in answering your evaluation questions. Next, you will need to put your design into action and begin gathering your evidence. This could be done through surveys, interviews, focus groups, or media metrics. Data collected could be both quantitative and qualitative, meaning both numerical data like community members like counting the number of parents or participants at a parents' night out, or non-numerical data like community members' perceptions of the campaign. Once you've collected your data, think about the best way to analyze and present the data. This could include calculating descriptive statistics or running more advanced testing on quantitative data. It could also include describing themes from your qualitative data. When you begin to think of your evaluation questions, think through the data and information you will need and consider the feasibility of collecting this information. Do you have the staff and resources to support this effort? What additional resources and staff may you need? And certainly, how do these data relate back to your original questions and stakeholder interests? Next, Rachel is going to dive more into conclusions and reporting on findings.
Thanks, Erin. So next, you're going to want to come up with some conclusions based on your evaluation and the data you've collected. So what information do the findings you have give you? What does this information mean for how you implement the campaign? Does any of this information impact your stakeholders, like your funders or other community members? Also consider the accuracy of your efforts. Do your conclusions that you've come up with align with the desired outcomes that you want of your campaign in your community? Each conclusion you draw should be derived from the evidence that you've collected within your community during your evaluation. Once you've analyzed the data and drawn your conclusions, this information needs to be shared with other community members and stakeholders. It's important to share your findings to help inform those in your community and your funders of your success and your recommendations for improvement. As part of the Talk They Hear You evaluation team, we would love to see any of the evaluation reports you've written, or if you have collected any data, feel free to share that with us as well. The information can better help us serve you and model for other organizations what a community level evaluation looks like. And lastly, once you've completed all those steps of the evaluation process, you want to repeat this process over time and create an ongoing feedback loop for yourself. This might seem a little daunting, but you can use the same design each time, and you already outlined and choose a reasonable timeline. And as you go, you can also alter the design and change how you're implementing the campaign and find systems that work best for you in your community. And Chelsea's going to go ahead, and I think she already did put the link in the chat to the CDC website that has more information on the evaluation steps. And next, I'm going to hand it over to Melissa.
Thanks, Rachel. So now we have two more poll questions. The first one is, do you currently evaluate, or have you previously evaluated your organization's Talk They Hear You implementation efforts? And if so, who is completing or who completed the evaluation? And we'll give you guys about another minute or so to answer. Okay, so it seems like the responses coming in are slowing down. So it seems like most of you are either actively evaluating, have conducted an evaluation in the past, or are interested in starting an evaluation. So thanks for joining us here so we can start these conversations with you. Additionally, if you, it seems that most of you conducted either an internal evaluation or were unsure. About a quarter of you reported using a third-party evaluator. All of those are valid responses. It's not, sometimes using a third-party evaluator can give the appearance of being unbiased, but there's also costs attached, so everybody has to do what works for them. So, and thank you for your feedback. Now back over to Erin.
Thanks, Melissa, and thank you all for answering those polling questions. Now we're going to split into our first breakout session. We would like to dive a bit deeper into your current data collection efforts and report ways that you have implemented Talk They Hear You and what resources you wish you would have had or would like to have moving forward to support your evaluation efforts. Breakout rooms will be led by a moderator from the Talk They Hear You campaign team, and we're going to ask for volunteers to help us take notes. Please remember, the more feedback and the more honest, the better. We'll have about 10 minutes to discuss before we turn to the full group. And again, another example of how much you all have a lot of the answers and want to make sure we capture this. So again, we'll be providing resources following this presentation, and some of the things we'll highlight, including FAQs that sort of came up and that we might not have time to address, is some of the strategies you all have been using to not just boost attendance, but viewership and how to capture that. How about Caitlin from your group?
Yeah, Karen actually was the one who was going to report out, but I did want to just note that we had several new people in our group that were very interested in learning more about this and were very complimentary of the whole program and just learning more about it. And this type of feedback was very well appreciated, but I did want to turn it over to Karen to report out from our group's findings.
Yeah, thanks. Those who have participated in collecting data used social media, Facebook, Twitter, their own database. We use our own database with our community partners and coalition members. Also campaign material on TV, but it's hard to collect the data back from that. Then what's done with the data, it's shared with the community, discussed in the coalition, how to best move forward to the next step. Also, the data is used for reporting to grant providers. What would be helpful to have questions from a focus group or other stakeholders in advance? Did I miss anything, Caitlin?
That was perfect. Yep, that's what I had written too.
Okay, great.
I love that idea. So we could provide some resources to facilitate the focus groups and things like that you're hosting. I love that. That's a great idea. And Kaylee, how about your group?
Yeah, really great. My group was mostly new evaluators, really interested in the session and learning more about how to implement evaluation, how to share their metrics and how to boost them. So very exciting on my end.
Well, one of the things I'm noticing is a theme of people realizing that they may in fact have been doing evaluation all along. We just, don't always put this big word onto it. So, I think that's one of the important parts that we're often assessing what's going on. And now we just want to capture the work that you guys have been doing and help you, and we'll talk a little bit about this as we go into the logic model, how evaluation can be of service to you on a much larger level. I think at this point, we will move on. I think, Rachel, you're up with introducing the logic model.
Great, thanks, Erin, and thanks, guys, so much for participating in the breakout rooms and that discussion. So we're going to circle back to our logic model. On the screen, you're going to see a sample logic model that we're going to fill out. We're going to walk through some of the different aspects of it and how this can be a crucial part in planning your evaluation. So following the demonstration, we're going to do a Q&A session. So feel free to write down your questions in the Q&A box. You should see that as a button on your screen. And we're also going to share a copy with the slides with you after the meeting. So if you want to look back, you'll have those. And if there's any questions we don't get to, or even the ones we do get to and discuss, we'll send you out that FAQ after, so you'll get all of the information that we talk about today. So now I'm going to pass it back to Erin to get us started.
Okay, great. Yep. So just to reiterate, feel free to put questions in the Q&A if they come up. So when we think about a logic model, the first column often is called the inputs column, and we're going to look at those. And that's where the resources that might be available within your community, including the staff, the partnership, stakeholders, or other physical resources. So where you might hold a parents' night out, like a community building or school. For our example, we're going to use staff, schools, parents, funders, funding, available space, and state and local laws as our inputs. And we'll talk a little bit about why making sure that you're thinking about policy and governing that influences kind of how your campaign works. And I did hear that actually in our chat a little bit about how, people are having to navigate or tweak things based on particular rules or policies at the local or state level.
So now we're going to talk a little bit about activities. So activities or interventions, these are the things that you're actually doing or providing for your audiences. So it could be brochures, fact sheets, videos, PSAs, parent night out events, Screen for Success. All of these things can be considered in the activities or intervention column.
So after you have your inputs and your activities, you're going to want to look at your outputs. So you want to look at your outputs as the direct result of what the work is. So these should be measurable effects of your activity. So in our example, our outputs are going to be parents viewing those discussion starter videos, attending the parents' night out events that you hold, watching those PSAs, and taking the S4S screener with their children.
All right, just giving folks a little bit of time to read the slide. There's a lot of language here. And like we said, we'll be sure to pass on a PDF of this following this meeting. After outputs, you're going to see your outcomes column. And this is really going to depend on a lot of different things. And for those of you that have ever seen a logic model, some people have short, mid and long-term goals. Sometimes people call their long-term goals the larger impact. So for a campaign like Talk They Hear You that we might be evaluating on a large scale, this long-term impact would be something like, reducing substance use among teens, right? Or increasing, improving relationships or improving conversation skills at a greater level. Short-term outcomes, however, are more things that tend to happen like you'd expect in the short term, right? The weeks and months after your activities. A lot of the things that we've been talking about measuring and the movement that we've seen, what I'm hearing from people is really a short-term outcome, like the increase in knowledge or increased awareness around particular topic areas. In our example here, the short-term outcomes could include increasing parents' knowledge, as I said, relating different topics to alcohol or substance use, and certainly the confidence in these conversations. And Melissa.
Hi, so now we're going to talk about indicators. The indicators are also called benchmarks. So your outcomes should always be measurable and can be so benchmarks or indicators are the ways you assess them. So indicators should directly relate to the activities and the targeted behavior of your intervention. So in our example, indicators could include a parent feedback survey after the parents' night out, and maybe even before and after the parents' night out. So you can look at the change in knowledge and attitudes in between the two. You might want to look at PSA viewing metrics. You might want to look at numbers of attendees, de-identified usage data from Screen for Success. So they could also be, how many times parents discuss various themes that are related to your short-term outcomes. If your short-term outcome is talking about increasing parents' sense of confidence as they talk to their kids about underage drinking and substance use, if you choose to have a focus group, you may discuss if and how parents are feeling. Are they feeling more confident after the intervention? So I think it's really, your indicators should be SMART and measurable, all those great acronyms that we all talk about when we talk about evaluation. But and now we're going to move on to the long-term outcomes with Rachel.
Thanks, Melissa. So the last piece of this that you're going to want to look at are the long-term outcomes. And the long-term outcomes of your implementation focus on the impact of your efforts and can occur over the span of several months or even up to years. So this is the ultimate goal that you're going to try to achieve within your community while using the campaign. And again, similar to what Melissa just said, you want this to be measurable and you want it to be something that you can measure with yourself within the community. So for our example that we've been using, our long-term outcomes are going to be increased awareness, knowledge, and impact of the campaign on the community. And this could be measured through a community survey or having focus groups or talking to your community members about how their perceptions have changed or the knowledge they've gained over time. Give you a minute to look at it, and then we'll hop on to the completed logic model with Erin.
So we hope to share a framework like this in the community implementation guide, which is currently in development. I definitely think with the chat box and some of the discussion topics that came up that this is going to be a well-received resource. So a guide that really talks about, best practices from how to implement this campaign, and also will include how to evaluate. And as we talked about in our breakout room, how to actually determine if the campaign, if your work is doing what we say we're trying to do, or what the logic model is indicating is our plan of action. We're also now going to discuss a bit about questions and comments that you might have.
You know, Erin
Yes.
and Scott, I'm thinking, let's go back to the previous slide as we ask these questions, just so people can take a look at the logic model and if anything comes up.
Sounds good.
So we would love to hear from you if you have any questions about logic models or really anything that we've talked about today. I saw in the chat, there's a couple of questions going, or a couple of conversations going on back and forth about social media and social media metrics. Oh, okay. I'm gonna answer this live. So Lynn asked that she is not familiar with Screen for Success. So Screen for Success is a new effort here within Talk They Hear You. It is a risk assessment screener that parents currently can provide to their young people, or young people can take it directly. What it does is it asks a series of questions about the person's health, wellness, and well-being, and then at the end gives a report along with resources targeted to your location. Because you put your zip code in the front, and then it spits out of resources that are nearby, depending on the answers. So again, it's not a diagnostic model, but it does say, particularly if a parent sees that a child may be struggling, they could use this as a discussion starter, go through the questions, start those conversations about different things. And then at the end, discuss the results and say, hey, I didn't realize what the impact, maybe a family member's illness is having on you. Let's talk about that. Or, I see here that you've mentioned that you've tried marijuana. Let's talk about that. All these different areas are covered. And I believe that Chelsea put the link in the chat. We can also access it through our mobile app. Or on the computer. Other questions?
There was a question that came through the chat.
Oh, yeah.
How do you measure, quote unquote, impact on the community?
Wow. So that's going to be a multifaceted one. Right. So one of the things you're going to want to look at is, membership growth. How many members are you pulling in from your different communities? You're going to want to look at, if you can, attendance. Obviously, if you boost things via social media, you can usually get that at least somewhat geo-targeted. So you can look at that. You're also going to want to look at local policies and things like that. You may be able to really, if, let's say, I personally live in Pittsburgh, right? And so, there's a movement afoot to keep liquor stores from opening closer to schools than they already are. Someone wanted to change the guidelines. So now there's a whole petition drive and things like that happening around that, so those sorts of ways, being involved in the environment in which, our target audience, parents and kids, live in, can be really helpful. And so, it's not going to be a one-shot deal. You're not going to be able to really take if you do a survey of your community, let's say in partnership with your local healthcare provider, they give out the surveys, the people answer them. If you only do it once, you have a snapshot of what's happening at that moment in time. I would encourage you to create some sort of long tail lasting partnership where you could maybe have the survey given out for 1 month every year for every intake person in a pediatrician's office, for example, or something of that nature. So in short, like it's it is multifaceted. It is not time bound necessarily, and it's sort of one of those evergreen things. Rob,
So
please join us.
I just wanted to mention, as you're talking about community impact, many of you may be familiar with Communities That Care, other statewide events around state epidemiological work groups that are going on that you can work with. Each of your states will have a state work plan, and in many of your states, Talk They Hear You is being rolled out. So you might want to check with your NPN, your National Prevention Network person, or your state SSA, Single State Authorities Office, the person who leads your substance abuse agency in your state. Many of them are involved in this way. And that would provide you some secondary sources of data. It also may be the case that in some states, your folks are actually including things in your statewide survey. You may actually have localized data that comes back to you that you could add into as part of your community impact as well. So if you're familiar with the Strategic Prevention Planning Framework, which is SAMHSA's guide on program implementation and then around prevention in particular, then this might be an asset and a resource to you.
Thanks, Rob. That's very helpful information.
Yeah, and I also want to make a plug for why it's super important, right, to have this grounded, right, in your theory and your understanding, and why that qualitative data is also important, because we can think about larger outcomes. And let's say we were looking at one of the outcomes was, you would say, you know, greater access to substance abuse treatment. And some people would say, oh, well, that means more people are using. But in fact, it could actually mean way less people are, and they're getting help earlier, right? And so it's really important to, right, have a connection to how are we actually interpreting, right, those longer term community, you know, impacts. And that's one of the things that I think has been coming up, you know, sort of in the chat, but also we talked about it in our breakout session, really understanding what does that larger scale impact actually mean, and how do we interpret that data, and housing that empirically in the evidence of our logic model.
I saw a question in the chat about getting people engaged. I'd like to actually invite my colleague Nell Nadal. She recently led part of the effort on the community engagement document that SAMHSA produced, and this could be a very useful tool to answering that question. And of course, I may have just put Nell completely in, you know.
No, just had to find the controls. Basically, the community engagement guide is bringing to life something that all of you who are working at the local community know, that you need to be able to connect with the audiences that you're trying to reach, and that connection is not limited to just finding out who they are, but you find out how many different ways can you work with them to help create the messaging, get the messaging out, evaluate the messaging. So a lot of what that document was intended to do was to showcase the science that we do have, because it's not something that gets really deep research yet, but there are a lot of good tools and things that you can look to as far as examples, much like you've been sharing already within this webinar, as far as different strategies that you guys are taking on to get the campaign out, and then figure out how does it fit within the regular routine of whatever prevention activities you're doing. How does it augment, enhance, whatever? Because we don't believe we've created everything that you need, but we know we have really solid content for you to work with and to build on, and to help build what you've got. And yes, you have found the document. So that is the one. It has some ideas too, especially for your measurement, that there's some ways you can figure out how are you doing in terms of your engagement, and what does that mean? And it's also useful if you do capture some of those metrics, that you can use that when you're putting together funding requests, just to show that you really are connected within your community. I mean, you pretty much know who the trusted messengers are, and there's a lot of things that you've seen probably over the years if you've been doing this for a while, and you know which things actually have value and which things work. So it's a good starter piece if you haven't necessarily spent any time looking at that particular area. I mean, if you're going to sustain something, obviously, if the community doesn't believe you're a trusted source, you're not going to get too far.
Thanks very much, Nell. Appreciate it greatly.
Any other questions or comments people want to give us? No? Thank you, Rob and Nell, for your helpful feedback. So we have one more poll question. So we're hoping, what evaluation topics would you like to learn more about in future meetings? Hopefully you'll take a minute and respond. Yeah, so it looks really like all the above. I mean, we're pretty much tied between all four. All right, this is great. I mean, it seems like there's a lot of interest. And we will take all this information back and come up with our next community engagement plan. So thank you all for your participation, and I'm going to hand it over to Rachel.
Thanks, Melissa, and thank you all so much for participating in those polls, the feedback, and the breakout rooms. We do just want to quickly highlight some new products on our What's New page on the Talk They Hear You site. Chelsea's going to drop the link to that in the chat. And we also are still collecting some information on the community implementation guide. So if you have a chance, please fill out the form we've been sending around. And if you'd like to participate even more in that, feel free to drop your name and your email in the chat, and we'll grab that and reach out to you. And lastly, we're just finishing up a new campaign partners webpage for the website, so be on the lookout for that as well. Thank you so much for all of your input and participation today, and I'll hand it back to Melissa.
Just want to end today thanking you all for coming and participating. Again, please email us at talktheyhearyou@saiservices.com. We're happy to answer any questions about the campaign, materials, evaluating, anything really. Just please reach out. We're here to help you.
And if you haven't done so already, please sign up for our campaign e-newsletter using the link that you see on the screen, which is also now in the chat box. You can follow SAMHSA and Talk to Hear You on the social media platforms that are listed on this slide. And you can engage with us online using the Talk to Hear You hashtag. Please stay tuned for the recap email with more information and some of the themes that we touched on today. The Talk to Hear You campaign reflects the guidance that SAMHSA has received from our community, state, and federal partners. You are the heartbeat of the campaign, and we wouldn't be anywhere without your valuable input. Now, as a reminder, if you're interested in becoming a Talk to Hear You champion and providing campaign feedback on a regular basis, please let us know in the chat or via email. On behalf of SAMHSA and the entire Talk to Hear You campaign team, we want to thank everybody for participating and for sharing your very valuable feedback.